Thanks to your failure, I got to marry Harper. That's what my brother said to me, right in the main hall in front of hundreds of wedding guests. Harper, my ex-girlfriend. The one who left me because I didn't have a solid career. And now, after all these years, she shows up again. Wearing a wedding dress, hand in hand with my brother, like our past never happened. I had kept quiet for years. But at that moment, I knew I couldn't stay silent anymore. So I spoke up and exposed everything, including the fact that Harper had cheated on me with another man while we were still together. Please stick around and let me know what you think about my choices. Hello everyone, I'm Brian. I'm 30 years old and currently running a tech company called Novalink. We build user behavior analytics platforms for businesses, not a glamorous field, but enough to keep me comfortable in my safe zone. I've always preferred staying behind the scenes of what I create. No media appearances, no success stories on social media, no interviews. The way I chose to stay in the background, to avoid drawing attention, not to upset anyone, didn't start with work. It was rooted deep in my childhood when I was just a kid growing up in my home. Besides me, there's Luca, my older brother in my family. He's 2 years older than me. He's confident and charismatic, always at the center of every conversation. And me, I stayed in the back, listening, observing, and trying my best not to be a burden. Our parents always showered him with encouragement, with proud looks full of expectations. As for me, I was only mentioned if someone asked. That was my reality for most of my life. And for a long time, I believed that sometimes in a family you must step back to keep everyone close. I thought staying quiet was the safest choice, to avoid tension, keep things from getting awkward, and ensure no one was uncomfortable because of me. But then, just over a year ago, I spoke up for the first time in my life. Not out of anger, not to start a fight, but simply because I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. And from that moment on, something began to crack. Slowly, quietly, but unmistakably, with my brother, my parents, and the fragile sense of peace I had spent my whole life trying to protect. I remember that day clearly. It was just an ordinary weekend afternoon. Not a birthday, Thanksgiving, or any special occasion. Dad called and asked me to come home for dinner. He said there was something important he needed to announce. His tone was flat and gave away nothing specific, but it was enough for me to understand. If I didn't show up, there'd be trouble. Truth be told, I didn't want to go, because I already knew precisely what those dinners felt like. The kind where every conversation circles Luca, my older brother. He's the one who makes everyone laugh. The one they ask about first, the star of all the family stories my parents love to retell. And me, I just sat there quietly, blending into the background. And if I ever got mentioned, it was usually to compare my attitude, my path, the quiet way I lived that never reasonably fit their expectations. I told Dad I couldn't make it. I said I was busy, but he wouldn't let it go. His voice turned sharp over the phone, short, pressured. He said I had to come. It wasn't a request. It was an order. And like so many times before, I gave in to keep the peace. I nodded, got in my car, and drove back to the house I knew like the back of my hand, right down to how it felt to sit at that dinner table. Some people might wonder, if I'm the CEO of a tech company, making a solid income, living an independent and stable life, shouldn't I be the one they're proud of? But the truth is, they still don't even know what I do. I've never told them about my job, about the things I've built. I've never said that my company has a few dozen employees, that I earn 7 figures a year, or that I'm behind systems they probably use without even realizing. To my parents and Luca, I'm just the quiet son who works from home, freelancing, sitting in front of a computer all day, not wearing a suit, not going into an office, not achieving anything they'd ever brag about to their relatives. And I've never bothered to correct them. Not because I'm hiding anything, but deep down, I know. The things I've built were never what they cared about. At precisely 6 o'clock, I arrived at the house. No surprise, Luca was already there. He was always the first to show up at family gatherings, constantly trying to reinforce his image as the perfect son in our parents' eyes. The moment I stepped into the dining room, Dad looked up, and without even trying to hide his irritation, he hit me with the usual line, "Luca's here on time. You're still keeping that habit of showing up last." I swallowed hard and tried to stay calm, but I could feel the heaviness spreading through my chest. I pulled out a chair, sat down, and looked straight at them. My voice was flat, steady. "If there's something you need to say, just say it. I've got things to do later." I wasn't trying to start anything. I was tired of hearing the same jabs for the last 30 years. After a brief silence, Luca set his glass down and laced his fingers like he was preparing for a speech. He spoke, trying to keep his tone composed. "In 2 weeks, I'm getting married. I hope you'll put the past behind you and come." I looked up and met his eyes. Calmly, I asked, "Have you thought this through?" The room went still like someone had dimmed the lights. I glanced around the table, then continued, this time loud enough for everyone to hear. "Harper was once my girlfriend. She left me because I had nothing back then. And 4 years after that, she dated nearly 10 different guys. I'm not so sure she's with Luca because of love. He should think long and hard before making that decision." Right after I said that, Luca shoved his chair back, and his voice rose with anger. "You don't get to insult Harper." He took a step toward me, pointing straight at my face, his expression red with rage. "A woman as beautiful and talented as her would never go for someone like you. Broke, no future. She chose me and she was right. Are you being dumped? You deserved it." I stayed seated, looking at him. My throat tightened for a second. But this time, instead of going silent like I always did, I stood up and said, "This isn't about rich or poor. This is about who's genuine and who's not fake." I stared at him for a moment, then spoke again, my voice lower but steady. "You don't need to defend her just to look noble. I'm saying what I know because I was once the guy she claimed to love with all her heart. And she left me the moment someone richer came along. If you believe she loves you for you, not for your title or bank account, then you don't need to argue with me." I stopped there, sat quietly, and picked up my water glass but didn't drink. I wasn't trying to win. I just needed to say what needed to be said. Then my dad cut in, his voice cold and sharp like a blade. "What would a guy glued to a computer all day know? Just shut your mouth." Next came my mom. She wasn't angry, but her tone, her eyes, somehow weighed heavier than all the yelling before. "Or maybe you still have feelings for her?" The second she said that, I looked at her, stunned she would even go there. And right then I knew, if I said one more word, it would all spiral beyond control. So I stood up, grabbed my coat, looked at all three of them, and said just one thing: "I think I'll head out." And I left, not out of anger, but because I knew this wasn't a family conversation anymore. After leaving my parents' house, I didn't go straight home. Instead, I drove around downtown for a while, eventually stopping in front of an old coffee shop, a place I often went to when my mind felt too restless to return to the quiet of home. I sat in my usual spot by the window, ordered a plain Americano, no sugar, and leaned back in the chair, watching the traffic thin under the soft yellow glow of the streetlights. The quiet helped settle something inside me. But with that stillness, the memories started returning. Slowly, clearly. 8 years ago, just after I graduated. Back then, I was just a fresh grad with nothing but a degree and many unfinished dreams. I had met Harper a year before that through a mutual friend during one of those small weekend hangouts at a park or a neighborhood bakery near campus. Harper stood out. She was sharp, confident, and always knew exactly what she wanted. We started with casual conversations, and before we realized it, we were inseparable. College wasn't easy for me. I worked almost every evening to cover rent and textbooks. She wasn't in a much better financial spot, but we shared everything, from cheap dinners at our go-to sandwich shop to late-night study sessions at the library until closing. I still remember one night when we were both exhausted from exams and broke. She looked at me, reached across the table in a near-empty diner, held my hand and whispered, like she was afraid she'd forget if she didn't say it out loud, "I don't need you to be rich. I need you not to give up. We'll build something together. Okay?" Another time, when I told her I felt lost, like all my friends already had their futures mapped out, she tilted her head, smiled softly, and said, "Who needs a clear direction when I know who I want to walk with?" And the night before I graduated, she told me, "I don't care how much you make, as long as the person who walks through that door at the end of the day is you." I believed her. I believed every word. I never imagined she'd ever take a different path. But everything changed the night I saw her kiss another man. It all shattered, like cracked glass that had been holding together too long, just waiting for one slight tap to break apart completely. That night, I wanted to surprise her. After a late shift at work, I stopped by her favorite place and picked up a box of lasagna, her comfort food, especially when stressed. I drove to her apartment unannounced, thinking I'd knock on the door, hold up the food, and see her childlike, surprised smile. We'd have a late dinner, chat about nothing and everything, and she'd rest her head on my shoulder like always. But no, just as I turned onto her street, I saw her standing near the gate of her building. She was talking to a man older than me. A sleek black sedan was parked next to them, The kind of car where the maintenance bill could swallow my entire year's salary back then. I stopped my car mid-street. Seconds later, I saw Harper wrap her arm around his shoulder, and they kissed. A natural, familiar kiss. The kind that doesn't just happen once. I didn't get out, didn't call her name. I just sat there, holding the still warm food, feeling completely hollow. I don't even remember how I turned the car around. After the man drove off, I stepped out. I stood in front of her. She froze when she saw me, took a step back in shock. When I told her I had seen everything, she didn't deny it. She looked me in the eye and admitted it, said she'd been seeing someone else. And just before it all ended, she told me something I know I'll never forget. We should stop. I don't hate you, but I can't sacrifice my future to be with someone who still has to skip meals to pay rent. I went numb. I didn't say another word. Not because I had nothing to say, but because deep down, I knew she was right. Back then, I had only been working for 3 months. My first job, barely making $3,000 a month. Just enough to rent a rundown apartment on the city's outskirts and get by on a tight budget. I used to believe that if two people loved each other enough, they could get through anything together. But Harper didn't see it that way, and I couldn't blame her. It was at that moment I started to understand. Some people are born to choose a different road. And sometimes you're just a brief stop along the journey they were always meant to leave behind. After Harper left, I tried to act fine for the first 3 weeks. I showed up to work on time, still smiled, made small talk, and lived as if it was just a passing rain shower that would soon clear. But by week 4, I finally broke. Not in a dramatic, crashing down kind of way, but in that quiet, hollow kind of collapse. That's when Michael, my best friend since college, showed up, right on time like he could feel I was sinking. I still remember that night. I was curled up on the balcony, half a beer in hand. Michael stood next to me, didn't say much, didn't ask how I was. He just looked at me and dropped this blunt line. You want her back? Want to be remembered your whole life as the guy who got dumped? 'Cause he had nothing to offer. That hit straight at whatever pride I had left. But instead of getting mad, I sat up. And that was when I started again. In the days that followed, I took on 2 jobs. By day, I worked as a tech support guy at a mid-level software firm. By night, I freelanced, writing code, building databases, taking on anything legal that paid on time. That became my rhythm. 3 years later, I had saved up a decent amount. I don't remember the exact moment or number, but I remember staring at my bank account one evening and seeing it just shy of $200,000. I sat there, staring at the screen like I was reading someone else's story. And then, again, it was Michael. The same guy who'd pulled me out of that pit was the one who pushed me forward once more. I remember it vividly. The same coffee shop we always went to. Light music in the background. The smell of freshly brewed espresso in the air. He leaned in, set his cup down, looked me in the eye and said, "What you're building for others can make them millions. So why can't you be the one making it?" That question dug deep. I couldn't sleep before 2 a.m. for days, thinking about it repeatedly. 2 weeks later, I quit my job. I poured everything I had into starting Novalink. My company, my risk, my leap. I added a small bank loan with a low interest rate, and it began just like that. The first year was brutal. Clients were scarce. Cash flow was a constant red alert. There were nights we thought we wouldn't make it and days we nearly shut down because we couldn't keep up with costs. But we pushed through. Every line of code was written with the belief that someone, somewhere, would need what we were building. By year 2, things started looking up. We had a few steady clients, just enough to keep the team running. We were not thriving, but we were no longer drowning in debt. Then came the AI boom. When the world shifted and started looking for more innovative ways to work with data, Novalink was already prepared. We didn't miss that wave. We landed our most significant contract yet. The systems we built became strategic solutions for dozens of companies. Suddenly, people were talking about Novalink. Tech blogs wrote features. Forums analyzed our business model. Investors began to knock on our door. There was just one thing they couldn't figure out. Across every datasheet, company profile, or feature article, the name of Novalink's founder was always left blank. Who's the person behind Novalink? That question showed up in headlines more times than I could count. But I stayed silent. Not because I wanted to be mysterious, but because I knew some things only belong in the spotlight when the time is truly right. During all the years I poured my life into building Novalink, my parents never once asked if I was doing okay. To them, Luca was the only one worth being proud of. Every major holiday I still showed up. Birthdays, Christmas, Thanksgiving. I'd arrive on time, bring gifts like everyone else, smile just enough, and make polite small talk. Then I'd quietly find a corner in that crowded house, pour myself a drink, and enjoy the gathering in my way, unnoticed, unbothered, and honestly unmissed. There were times I wanted to tell them, wanted to say that the son they always saw glued to a laptop, the one they joked about, brushed off, never really asked about, that son was running a system relied on by dozens of companies, that he was building something real. But every time that thought started to rise, I'd remember something Michael once said. It was the same half-joking tone he always used, but that time, he looked at me more seriously than usual. Don't ever let people know you're successful and loaded, especially the ones who never believed in you. Trouble finds you faster than you think. Trust me. So, I stopped trying to prove anything. I kept playing the part. The quiet youngest son, always buried in his laptop, doing God knows what. No one asked. No one cared to know. And that was fine. As for Harper, she faded into the background over time like a memory washed away by meetings, deadlines, and endless lines of code. I didn't force myself to forget her. I didn't cling to anything either. Life was too whole for the things that once hurt to find a place. I used to think we'd never cross paths again. Maybe some people just become part of the past and stay there. But fate doesn't always let you forget that easily. I saw her again at my mother's birthday party 2 years ago. That day was a cozy family gathering, traditional just like my mom always liked. And it was also the first time Luca brought Harper home as his girlfriend. She walked in wearing a tight red dress, soft curls in her hair, and flawless makeup that I didn't even recognize for a split second. I didn't call her out, didn't say a word. I stood there, a glass of wine in hand, watching from a distance. After a few over-the-top introductions from Luca, his usual style, he turned toward me and said, "This is my younger brother, always glued to a computer screen, still not sure if he knows where he's going in life." Harper heard that and smiled. A tilted, subtle smile, just enough to drip with condescension. Then she turned to Luca and said, light and playful like she was making a harmless joke, "I know, I once considered getting to know him, but that was all." Right then, I saw it. There was a slight pause on Luca's face like something clicked and froze for half a second. But Harper tilted her head, gave a soft little laugh, and followed up with, "You're the one I truly love." And just like that, he smiled again, like the moment before was just a throwaway line from a bad sitcom. After that introduction, Luca walked Harper around the room, introducing her to everyone, glasses clinking, laughter trailing behind. Toward the end of the evening, when the crowd had thinned out and conversations had faded into background noise, Harper walked over to where I was standing. Still, with that polite party smile on her lips, something in her eyes had sharpened. She stood next to me, took a slow sip of wine, then leaned in slightly and said quietly, "All these years, and you're still the same, huh? Still that forgettable silhouette. Nothing special. No future. It proves I made the right choice when I left." She didn't speak loudly, but it was loud enough to cut through the soft background music. Loud enough to pierce the silence between two people who should have been strangers by now. While I was still lost in old memories, a server gently approached and told me the cafe was closing soon. I nodded, thanked them, paid the bill, and entered the crisp night air. The city felt quieter than usual, and my mind kept spinning with thoughts I couldn't quite put into words. That night, I drove home in silence. No music, no clear thoughts, just one question looping over and over in my head. Should I go to Luca's wedding? Part of me wanted to say no. After everything that had happened, the insults, the looks, the way they all made me feel so small, I had no reason to show up on their big day. But then I decided I would go, because like it or not, he was still my brother. And sometimes, even when the family doesn't deserve it, you show up anyway. Not for them, but for the version of yourself that still chooses dignity over bitterness. What I didn't expect, though, was that this one seemingly right decision would hand them the perfect opportunity to turn me into a punchline at their celebration. 2 weeks later, I attended the wedding after getting the venue details from my mother. It was a luxury event space in the city's heart. Just stepping into the lobby made it clear how much they'd spent to make this day perfect. I arrived 30 minutes early. It was Luca's big day after all. The moment I stepped through the doors, my father's eyes found me. He scanned me from head to toe, then said with that all too familiar, cutting tone, "I honestly didn't think you'd show. This place is for people who know how to dress and behave appropriately." Then, lowering his voice, glancing discreetly around the room, he added, Luca's bosses and business partners are here. Try not to embarrass him. I nodded, said nothing, and walked deeper into the venue. Luca and Harper were near the reception area. The moment they saw me, they both smiled. They walked over and offered polite, well-rehearsed greetings. You made it! Thanks for coming. Hope you enjoy the night. Just as they turned to leave, Luca leaned in close, eyes glinting with that familiar half-joking, half-mocking expression, and said, There's a little surprise coming your way later. I didn't respond. I just smiled slightly, poured myself a drink from the bar, and waited. About 30 minutes later, the ceremony officially began. Luca and Harper took the stage together, the soft sound of applause filling the room. They looked perfect, like a couple plucked from the pages of a wedding magazine. After a few words of thanks to the guests, Luca suddenly shifted his tone. He looked straight at me. And now, he said, I'd like to invite my younger brother Brian to join us on stage and share in our joy. The applause that followed was polite and controlled. After a brief hesitation, I stepped forward, keeping my expression calm, revealing nothing of my feelings. As soon as I reached him, Luca leaned toward the mic, his smile wide and gleaming. Ladies and gentlemen, the person I owe the most enormous thank you to tonight, it is my brother Brian. Because if it weren't for him, I wouldn't have Harper. Laughter rippled through the room, followed by a few scattered claps. The mood stayed warm and light. To most, it probably sounded like I had introduced them or maybe stepped aside out of brotherly support. But Luca wasn't done. He turned to me, placing a hand on my shoulder like we were close, and added, this time louder, clearer, and deliberately pointed. Brian, it's because of your failure that I got to marry Harper. Then he turned back to the crowd. Harper and Brian had a thing for a while back in the day, but Brian lacked ambition and didn't know what he wanted in life, and that gave me the chance to step into her heart. This time, the applause was louder. Some guests nodded, smiled, as if they just heard a touching story about fate and choices. No one thought anything of it, because to them, I was nothing more than a side character in the beautiful love story of Luca and Harper. But before Luca could continue, a man stood up from one of the front tables near the stage. He wore a gray suit, moved with calm authority, and spoke with a deep, steady voice. Luca, that was out of line. The light applause stopped. Luca froze. I turned to get a better look at the man, and the moment our eyes met, I recognized him immediately. It was Mr. Jonathan Blake, CEO of Vertex Financial Group. They had recently deployed Novalink's AI tool to analyze customer behavior online. I didn't know until that moment that he was also Luca's direct superior. After that heavy sentence, Mr. Blake walked toward me and extended his hand. His voice was low and calm but carried enough weight that the entire room seemed to fall silent to listen. Hello, Brian, the founder of Novalink. I shook his hand, still stunned, not yet able to say anything, when he picked up the mic and turned to face the crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, standing before you is the founder of Novalink, one of the fastest-growing tech companies in the last 2 years, twice named among the top 10 most promising startups in the industry. A ripple of murmurs spread across the hall. Heads turned. People began to look at me differently, like they were suddenly putting the pieces together. Then Mr. Blake turned to me and asked gently, Would you like to say something? I nodded. I didn't know exactly what I was going to say, but I knew, deep in my chest, that if ever there was a time to speak, it was now. He handed me the mic. I took it and drew a slow, steady breath. I've never been one for public speaking, but this time, I had something real to say, and it had waited long enough. Ladies and gentlemen, I began. Everything my brother said about me is true, but it's not the whole truth. I paused, let my eyes move slowly across the room, then continued. 7 years ago, Harper didn't just walk away from me because I didn't have a career. She cheated on me with another man while we were still together. And I saw it with my own eyes, right outside her apartment door, the night I showed up to surprise her. The room went still. Harper froze. Not a single sound moved through the crowd. I turned to Luca, not with anger, but with the quiet, steady look of someone who had long since let go of needing to be understood. Lowering the mic just slightly, I looked back out at the room. My voice was calm. I'm not angry today. I want to say thank you, especially to my sister-in-law, Harper. I turned to face her. No bitterness in my eyes. No accusations left. It's just a truth I needed to finish. If it weren't for you, I might still be clinging to a cheap kind of love, the kind that takes more than it gives. And I wouldn't have become the founder of Novalink. Your rejection, your contempt back then, that was the push I didn't know I needed. With that, I handed the mic back to Mr. Blake, gave him a respectful nod, and stepped down from the stage. I walked straight out the door, never looking back, because everything that needed to be said, I had already said. I went straight back to my apartment after that. I didn't feel happy exactly, but at least the weight in my chest had lifted a little. The moment I opened the door and stepped inside, coat still on, my phone rang. The screen lit up with a name, Mr. Blake. I picked up. His voice was as steady as ever, but there was a careful tone beneath it this time. He asked how I wanted to handle things with Luca, since, after all, Luca was one of his direct reports. He said he didn't want a personal matter to interfere with business, especially when Novalink had become one of their key strategic partners. I stayed silent for a few seconds, then replied clearly, "This is a family matter. I don't want to drag it into work. Please handle it however you see fit." There was a pause on the line. I heard him inhale, then slowly exhale, and then he said something I hadn't expected. "You know, the wedding's been called off." I froze, still standing by the door, hand on the lock. "Right after you left," he continued. "Harper walked out too. No one could stop her. She said she couldn't go through with it after what happened. She left Luca standing there alone. I didn't say anything, not because I felt triumphant, not because I wanted revenge, but because, in that moment, I felt nothing in particular. No sadness, no anger, no satisfaction, just a long, quiet stillness. The kind that settles in when something ends, and you're finally ready to let it go. The next morning, around 10 o'clock, I wrapped up a product development meeting and reached for my second cup of coffee when my assistant knocked on the door. She said 2 older people who said they were my parents were waiting in the lobby. I paused for a moment, not out of shock, but I hadn't expected they'd come to my office. They sat on the long couch near the reception area when I walked downstairs. I invited them into a small meeting room, closed the door behind us, and sat across from them. My father spoke first. No sugarcoating, no dramatic build-up. Just a simple, direct confession. I was wrong always to favor Luca. I thought he was the capable one worth investing in. But the son I never placed my hopes on turned out to be the one who made me rethink everything. My mother, sitting quietly beside him, added, her voice unsteady, "I regret not standing up for you during the times I should have. I stayed silent too long." After that moment of honesty, I set my coffee down, leaned back in the chair, and answered slowly, "If I weren't the founder of Novalink, would you still be here? Would you still be apologizing? Let's be honest with each other. For once." The room went quiet. A few moments passed before my father spoke again. His voice was low but steady, with no attempt to dodge the question. "We didn't come here to ask you for money. We don't want anything from you. It's just that, after everything, I finally see how capable my son is. If you're free, come home for dinner this weekend. That's all. We won't ask for a single cent." With that, they left. I stayed in the chair, my hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had already gone cold. I thought about what he said, not to test whether he meant it or not, but to ask myself, what is it that makes me feel lighter today? His apology, or the simple truth that I don't need it anymore? Later that same day, I received an email from Mr. Blake. Short, to the point. That is exactly his style. It read, "Brian, I've decided to terminate Luca's employment immediately. I can't allow his lack of personal control to affect the company's reputation or our partnership with Novalink. Rest assured, this decision has no bearing on Novalink." I read it twice, not out of disbelief, just to let it settle. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel pity. All I felt was this simple, clear thought. Luca brought this on himself. Right after, my assistant came back holding an iPad. "There's a video being shared on Twitter and Reddit," she said. "You might want to see it." I hit play. It was footage from the wedding stage last night, Luca's speech, my response, and the moment Mr. Blake stepped out and revealed who I was. The comments below were flooding in outrage, disbelief, judgment. Humiliating your brother at your wedding, only to get exposed by your boss. Unreal. Harper is a textbook case of betting on the wrong horse. This whole thing feels like a Netflix drama. Then came the press, tech blogs, social media outlets, even lifestyle magazines picked it up. No one took Luca's side. No one defended Harper. Words like opportunist, shallow, and disrespectful floated across headlines and comment sections. I turned off the video, set the iPad down, and leaned back in my chair. Still no satisfaction. There is no bitterness either. Just a quiet awareness. Some lessons, if you refuse to learn them with reason, will eventually come for you as loss. I thought that, after the wedding, Harper would disappear for good. But I was wrong. 3 months later, on a late afternoon after work, my phone buzzed with a short message. "Can I see you?" It was from Harper. We met at a familiar coffee shop we used to visit back then. When I arrived, she was already there, sitting quietly. I sat across from her. She didn't ask how she'd been. I didn't try to act cold, either. We just sat there, 2 cooling cups of coffee between us, and a silence so wide we didn't know where to begin. After a while, she lifted her gaze. Her eyes no longer held the confidence they once had. Then, in a voice soft but clear, she said, "I still love you." I looked at her, held that moment for a long, steady beat, then smiled gently. "I think you're mistaken," I said, voice even. "The person you loved was the version of me who was helpless, the one who saw you as his entire world." She didn't respond. She just lowered her head, shoulders trembling slightly, as if holding back something even she couldn't quite name. A few minutes passed. Then I stood up, placed enough cash on the table for both coffees, and walked out. As for Luca, my older brother, after he was fired, I heard here and there that he'd applied to a few companies. But every application was rejected. Not because he lacked the skills, but because the name Luca had become inseparable from that viral video. The backlash hadn't faded. And once the internet labels you as the guy who humiliated his brother at his wedding, second chances don't come easy. 6 months after that night, my phone rang on a quiet weekend afternoon. It was Luca. It was the first call since everything had fallen apart. I hesitated, then picked up. He only said one thing: "I want to see you, if you're okay with it." An hour later, we met at a small coffee shop near our old college apartment complex, a place we'd gone to a few times when we were just 2 broke students. Luca got there first. He was hunched slightly near the window, hands clasped, eyes avoiding mine when I walked in. No small talk. There are no lengthy explanations. After a pause, he spoke, his voice lower, rougher than I remembered. "I was wrong. I know that now, and I should have known it long ago. I've lost almost everything. My name, my job, Harper. I'm not here to ask for any of it back. I want one chance. A job. Any position you think I'm fit for." I didn't answer right away. Honestly, for most of that meeting, I just watched him. Listened. Took in every word, every movement, every glance. I was trying to understand whether what I was seeing was genuine remorse, or just another move from someone desperate to climb out of a hole. Eventually, I nodded. Not because I had fully forgiven him, but because if I was strong enough to make it through everything that happened, then I was strong enough not to carry bitterness forever. So I looked him in the eye and said clearly, "All right, you'll start at the bottom. No special treatment, no title, just work." Luca didn't say a word. He just nodded. And for the first time in a very, very long while, there was no arrogance in his eyes, only a man trying, honestly, to learn what it means to begin again. It's been a year since everything shattered, like a mirror thrown to the floor. I still drop by my parents' house now and then. Not often, but enough for them to know I'm still here. Still their son. Even if the distance between us now isn't measured in words, but in the quiet boundaries of caution and clarity. They no longer compare me to Luca. No more, "When will you settle down like your brother?" No more, "Luca's got more ambition than you." Now, they tell the neighbors that their youngest son is the founder of Novalink, that he's always busy, but he still remembers home. And every time they say that, I ask them gently to stop. Not because I don't appreciate it, but because I know pride built on guilt is fragile. I don't need them to brag about who I am. I need them to see me clearly, even if I were no one at all. As for Luca, he's still working at the lowest position in the company. Customer service. 45,000 a year. There is no bold title on his business card. No private office. No personal assistant. He shows up on time. He gets his work done. Not a single complaint. Sometimes, I catch him in the hallway, paper cup in hand, eyes on his phone like any other employee. And through all of it, I've come to understand, forgiveness isn't about erasing the past. It's not about someone paying the full price before you let them back in. Forgiveness is when you can look back without your chest tightening. When you can smile not because you've won, but because you no longer let what they did define who you are. And maybe growing up isn't about rising above others, but about standing steady enough that you no longer need to. And before I bring this story to a close, I want to ask you, those of you who've stayed with me through every word, every turn, was I wrong for choosing to speak the truth at the wedding? A moment that was supposed to be filled only with laughter and well wishes? Was I wrong for still giving my brother a second chance, even after he used the most important day of his life to humiliate me? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop your perspective in the comments below this story, and if something in it struck a chord with you, don't forget to hit subscribe, give it a like, and share it with others. Maybe someone out there needs to hear this today. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you again in the following story. I said I'm not paying it back. That money was for your sister, it's a family matter. What do you want? You gonna sue your mother? Those were the last words my stepmother said to me, right after I brought up the $120,000 she took to pay for my half-sister's wedding. I didn't say a word. I didn't scream. I didn't fall to my knees and beg like they always thought I would, because this time I truly wanted to know what would happen if I chose justice over family. I took them to court. I sued my father, Richard Wallace, and my stepmother, Clara, for misappropriating funds. Not because I stopped loving them, but because I realized, if I didn't draw the line, they would keep crossing it in the name of family. This is my story, and if you've ever been overlooked just because you were the quiet one in the family, then maybe you'll understand. Hello, my name is David. I'm 32 years old, and it's taken me nearly a third of my life to realize that sometimes the deepest wounds don't come from direct blows. They come from years of being overlooked, dismissed, and taken advantage of by your own family. My birth mother passed away when I was just 10. That was the first time I ever saw my dad cry, and the last time I truly felt close to him. A year later, he brought Clara home. She smiled sweetly whenever he was around, but the moment it was just her and me, she turned cold and distant. She never hit me, never yelled, but a single look or a sharp, icy word was enough to remind me I should stay quiet. When I was 13, Violet was born. My dad and Clara's daughter. He held her in his arms, wiped the sweat from his forehead, beamed with pride, and turned to me and said, "She's a miracle from God to our family." I smiled too, like it truly was a miracle. But something inside me, a confused, growing kid, quietly cracked that day. From then on, I became a shadow in my own home. Violet's birthdays always came with cake, invitations, and balloons filling the living room. Mine, if they remembered, got a quick, half-hearted text, and I slowly learned to accept that. I still remember when I won second place in the state math competition at 17. No one said a word. It was treated like nothing. But when Violet brought home a good job certificate from preschool, they had it framed and hung on the wall. When I was younger, I used to believe that if I just tried harder, they'd finally see me. But the older I got, the more I realized I was just the backdrop, someone else's stage lighting. And the thing I regret most, that I once accepted that as usual, letting them define what my life was worth. After all those years of living like a shadow, I knew I had to push myself harder than ever. I graduated with honors, landed a solid job, and started working as a data technician for a telecom company in downtown Seattle. My take-home pay was just under $8,000 a month. Steady, comfortable, enough to start saving month by month toward a goal I'd been chasing for years. Buying my first apartment, leaving that house, and finally having a space I could call my own. To save money and stay focused on that dream, I continued living with my dad, my stepmother, and Violet in a single-story home in Bellevue, Washington, about a 30-minute drive from my office. It was the house I grew up in. My old bedroom from high school still looked the same. My graduation gown from when I was 18 still hanging on the closet door, like a quiet reminder that once upon a time, I truly believed I'd be out of there soon. I didn't pay rent, but I covered the electricity, water, and internet, chipped in for the winter gas bill, replaced the dishwasher when it broke, and sent Violet a little spending money every week. No one asked me to do those things, but I felt it was right. I was the older brother, and I knew that without contributing, I'd never really feel welcome in that house. I used to believe that if we're family, we should share. Until that night at dinner, when they asked me to lend them $120,000 to pay for my sister's wedding. That was the moment I knew. Everything had started to slip past the line. My story really began a year ago on a quiet Sunday morning. I was sitting across from my dad in our tiny kitchen. "I'm about to sign the deposit agreement for a condo," I said, opening my laptop to show him the floor plan. "It's in Willow Creek, about 10 minutes from my office. Great price, full amenities. I'll move out in a few months." I kept going, giving him more details about the place I was ready to call home. I wasn't expecting applause or some emotional reaction. All I hoped for was a simple nod, some sign that he saw I'd grown up enough to start building my own life. But instead, he frowned, stirring his coffee slowly like he was weighing a poor decision. "What's wrong with staying here?" he said casually. "Prices are crazy these days. Who rushes to buy a house when the market's this unstable?" I looked at him for a long moment, not because I didn't already know where he stood, but because in that second, it became crystal clear he didn't want me to leave. Not out of concern, but because keeping me close gave him control, the same quiet control he'd always held over me. I took a slow breath and offered something more. My tone still calm, but this time I was testing the waters. "I've saved around $120,000. It's just enough to cover 30% of the condo. But it'd be better if I could buy it outright, if you're able to help cover part of it. I pay you back gradually. I don't want to borrow from the bank." I left the words hanging, like a bridge waiting to be crossed. But he never stepped forward. He just let out a breath, half chuckle, half dismissal. "David, you live with your parents. You've got no pressure. What's the rush? Whether you pay it off now or bit by bit. What's the difference?" Then he smiled, like what I said wasn't worth responding to. He stood up, patted my shoulder the way a grown man might console a child who didn't score well on a test, and added, "Living on your own isn't always smart. Sometimes knowing how to live with others, that's real wisdom." I didn't argue. I didn't say another word, because in that moment, I knew, if I wanted a life of my own, I'd have to take it. Please do not ask for it. And then, about a month later, right after I'd gotten out of the shower, I heard my dad calling me into the living room. He was sitting in his usual spot, the edge of the armchair by the window, and my stepmother, Clara, was peeling fruit nearby. "Come sit down. We've got something to talk about," my dad said. His voice was calm, so calm that it immediately put me on alert. Right then, Clara gave me a soft smile, the kind I'd seen plenty of times before. Not exactly warm, not quite cold, just calculated enough to make you let your guard down. "We wanted to talk about your sister's wedding," she began, her tone gentle, like she was chatting about garden decorations. I leaned back in my chair, silent. A chill ran down my neck, a gut instinct telling me something wasn't right. Clara went on, her eyes now lit with quiet hope. "Your sister's getting married soon, and, well, things are tight for the family. But you've already saved up some money for a house, and we were hoping you could lend us that amount." I didn't respond right away. I just looked at her, long enough that even Clara paused, her hands fidgeting with the hem of her shirt like someone who just got caught. So she knew. She knew I had the money ready for a down payment. And now I knew how. It was my dad. He told her everything the moment I shared my plan to buy a home. He didn't just dismiss my dream. He handed it over to someone else. As I sat there, still replaying the conversation I'd had with my dad a month ago, he suddenly spoke, cutting through the silence. "You already have the money, and we barely have anything saved. Your sister's only getting married once. That house of yours. Can it wait a little longer? We're family, David. Helping each other out is what families do." Clara, sitting beside him, gently turned the wedding ring on her finger, her eyes soft as if trying to comfort a child. "I just think since you're still living with us, you don't really have major expenses. And your sister? She's been dreaming of having a proper wedding, David." Before I could respond, Violet walked in from the kitchen, holding an iPad. The screen was lit up with images of a resort. She handed it to me and chimed in, "I want the wedding at Woodridge Estate. You know it, right? The Crystal Garden Hall right by the lake. Natural lighting, beautiful views, they do white and green themes, exactly the look I want. I saw a bunch of influencers get married there, and it's just perfect." I glanced at the screen. Base package, $42,000. Not including decor, outdoor reception, drinks, or live band. I looked at my dad and asked flat out, "If we can't afford it, why choose this place?" Violet's smile faded. Her brows drew together, lips pressed tight. What's that supposed to mean? This is the biggest day of my life. Before anyone else could speak, Clara jumped in, her tone still soft but now laced with a sharper edge. David, some things can't be measured in dollars. You're her brother. This is when you support her, not make her feel guilty. My dad nodded right after she said it, adding his jab. If you're already keeping score with your own family, how are you going to survive out in the real world? I leaned back in my chair, quiet, but inside, I knew if I agreed to this without putting anything in writing, every promise would vanish like it never happened. So I told them I needed time to think, and that I'd give them my answer tomorrow. That night I couldn't sleep. My mind kept drifting back to everything that had happened in the past. 8 years ago, not long after I'd started working full-time, my stepmother began asking to borrow money, always in the same familiar tone. Part request, part expectation, like she already assumed I'd say yes. I still remember one time clearly. She texted me late at night, her message written as gently as if she were inviting me to afternoon tea. David, your sister needs to pay her tuition. It's urgent. The school said tomorrow's the deadline. Can you help Mom cover $300 for now? I'll pay you back early next month. Back then, I didn't think twice. It was only a few $100s. Barely a dent in my paycheck at the time. I transferred the money that same night, but that early next month never came. Another time, my dad called me down to the garage. He stood under the flickering ceiling light, pointing up at the roof. There's a leak. I already called someone to fix it, but we need to put down $500 first. Can you help cover it? I'll pay you back this weekend. I nodded without hesitation, pulled out my wallet, and handed him $700. More than enough to cover it. I didn't ask questions, but like before, that repayment never happened. It was just another promise made, then forgotten. One evening, during dinner, I finally asked, casually, almost without thinking, Mom, do you remember the tuition money you borrowed from me back in November? Immediately, Clara set her chopsticks down and let out a mocking laugh. Oh, David, really? You still remember those tiny little things? My dad, sitting right beside her, snapped, his voice low and sharp, like I'd just broken some sacred rule. If you're going to help, then help. Don't keep score. What kind of person writes down every penny when it comes to family? At that moment, I went quiet, but inside, something turned cold. And it wasn't the weather, it was the way they spoke about me. Like my kindness was expected. Like if I dared to question anything, I was the one being ungrateful. After a sleepless night of thinking, the following day, I made the transfer. $120,000, the amount I'd spent 7 years saving, was sent straight to an account under the name of my stepmother, Clara Wallace. Right before hitting send, I added one final message. I'm transferring the $120,000 as requested. I trust you'll handle things responsibly, but I need the full amount back by May 15, 2024, to finalize the home contract. Please remember, this is money I'm lending you for Violet's wedding, not gifting it to you. A few minutes later, she replied, I'll return it before the 15th. Don't worry. That was the end of the conversation. I took a screenshot of the messages, emailed a copy to myself, saved it to my drive, then printed a hard copy and sealed it in an envelope. Not because I doubted they might pay me back, but because I was sure they wouldn't. And from the moment I transferred that money, I didn't ask and I didn't say much else. I stayed silent, not out of surrender, but to set the stage for what they had coming. Because this wasn't resignation, it was preparation. I knew the time would come when they'd forget, and when that moment arrived, I wouldn't remind them with words, not with pleading, not with the old guilt trip they loved to play, the "You're our son" card. No, this time they'd be reminded, by a letter from my attorney, because my kindness this time came with limits, and those limits were clear, firm, and legally binding. Violet's wedding unfolded precisely the way she'd dreamed, and just as my family had envisioned for months. Woodridge Estate looked like a scene pulled straight from a romantic movie. Flawless weather, soft music, the lake shimmering in the background. I sat quietly in a row of chairs off to the side, watching from a distance. No one asked how I felt. No one called me up to take photos. But I wasn't there to be in the pictures. I was there to witness the event built on the savings I'd spent 7 years putting together. And to remember that everything they once called a sacrifice for family, it was, in truth, a carefully calculated act of taking. I didn't expect anyone to thank me. but I hoped, at the very least, they'd keep their word. 2 weeks after the wedding, once the noise had settled and the decorations were packed away, I sent Clara a brief, respectful message. Not harsh, just a reminder of what we had agreed upon from the very beginning. Mom, I need the money back by the 15th, as we agreed, to move forward with the home deposit. I sent the message at 10 a.m. on a Tuesday. The rest of the day passed. My phone stayed silent. No reply. I waited another night. The following day, I tried calling my dad. He picked up after a few rings, his tone flat, like I'd interrupted him in the middle of his favorite sports program. What is it, David? I kept my voice steady, even softened it. Dad, I just wanted to remind you about the money we agreed on. I didn't even get to finish. He cut me off, irritated and sharp. You're really still talking about that? You're her brother. And you're asking to be paid back for helping your sister? Seriously. Those words stung. I gripped the phone tightly, not out of anger, but because that voice, that tone, was all too familiar. It was the same voice I'd heard for 30 years. Every time I dared to speak up. Every time I asked for a shred of fairness in this family. That night, Violet sent me a message of her own. Just a single sentence, followed by a laughing emoji. You're something else. Asking for money back after your sister's wedding. I read it. But I didn't reply. I wasn't angry. But somewhere deep inside me, something went still. Like a tide quietly pulling back from the shore. The last bit of trust one had left in them closed itself off quietly and thoroughly. Because in the end, they didn't just break their promise. They laughed at the fact that I'd kept mine. And if once I had hoped to resolve everything through kindness, now I knew, with more clarity than ever, kindness without boundaries will always be mistaken for weakness. I looked at the calendar. The 15th was fast approaching. And with it, their final choice. 3 days before the repayment deadline, I sent my dad a short, calm message. Dad, if you're free, can we grab a coffee on Wednesday evening? I want to talk clearly about the wedding money. No reply. I waited patiently until the next afternoon, then followed up with another message. This time more specific, more direct. Just 20 minutes, Dad. I don't want this to turn into something bigger, but the contract deadline for my apartment is coming up. The message showed read. Still nothing. Wednesday came. I showed up early, 10 minutes before the scheduled time, at our usual cafe on Main Street. I waited. 5 o'clock, 5:30, 6:15. Then I closed my laptop, stood up, and walked out. That night, when I got home, the living room was calm, just like always. The TV was playing Clara's usual cooking show. She was peeling an apple on her favorite old floral plate. My dad sat next to her, flipping through the evening paper. Violet had just stepped out of the shower, hair still damp, towel wrapped around her head. Her husband was slouched on the beanbag, laughing at something in a group chat on his phone. I stood in the doorway for a moment, then spoke. My voice wasn't loud, but it was steady, clear enough for everyone to hear. I sent a message inviting you to talk about the wedding money, but no one showed up. My dad didn't even look up. He flipped another page in the paper, his tone dismissive, like I just brought up something trivial. Oh, forgot. That small stuff needs a sit down now. Clara gave a soft, knowing laugh and slipped right into the conversation. David, you've got a good job and a stable place to live. Why make a big deal over that amount? I took a deep breath and replied slowly. I'm bringing it up because there was an agreement. You said clearly you'd pay it back by the 15th. My dad slammed the paper down on the table. His eyes locked on me, his voice sharp and condescending. You're acting like we're trying to rip you off. You've lived here rent-free with full meals and utilities. You're not broke, not jobless, not on the street, and you're making a scene over this. I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I wasn't boiling with rage. I was still, like a lake slowly freezing over. I answered, it's not about the money. It's about being treated fairly. Violet, sitting on the couch, scoffed. She crossed her arms and leaned back like this was all just some poorly written drama. Fairness? If you want fairness, move out. No one's holding you here. Then she turned to her husband, lowering her voice, part mockery, part smug confirmation of something she'd probably said before. Told you, didn't I? Her husband, a self-proclaimed startup founder who spent most of his time driving Uber, was kicked back, feet on the coffee table, chewing popcorn like it was theater. Your family's wild. This is like next level messy. I looked at each one of them. Once they were home. Now they sat there, all present but unfamiliar. like background characters in a story I no longer wanted to write. I didn't respond. I didn't react. I slid my hand into my coat pocket and felt the phone. Still recording. I had started the voice memo the moment I stepped out of the car. As I stood at the door, took that deep breath, and put my key in the lock, I already knew. This wouldn't be a conversation. It would be evidence. Washington is a one-party consent state. I didn't need to ask. I didn't need to tell them. As long as I knew, it was enough. The argument kept rising. Voices louder. Accusations sharper. My dad slammed the table. Clara's hands flew, her eyes red with anger as she shouted, "I told you. We're not paying it back. That money was for your sister. It's a family matter. What do you want? You want to sue your mother?" I stood there, calm, letting them show themselves. It took me 7 years to save that money, but just 7 days to truly see who they were. And exactly 7 minutes of audio. From the moment my key turned in the lock, to the second Clara screamed that final line, it was all I needed to record it all. Not a single word is missing. The following day, I went to see my attorney, Mr. Alan Whitaker. His office was on the 3rd floor of a red brick building in Old Bellevue, near the Central bus station. It wasn't big, but it was quiet. Mr. Whitaker was a middle-aged man, calm and deliberate in the way he spoke. He didn't over-explain, didn't rush. He reviewed the folder I brought, the bank transfer receipt, the message confirmation, and the 7-minute recording. After a few minutes of silence, he looked up and said, "We have enough to proceed." That same afternoon, the letter was drafted and sent. Key contents of the letter. On behalf of my client, Mr. David, last name, I am writing to formally request the return of $120,000, which was transferred to Mrs. Clara Wallace on April 17, 2024. This amount was given with the clear and documented understanding that it would be repaid in full by May 15, 2024. Enclosed are supporting materials, including a copy of the transfer receipt and written confirmation of the agreement. Suppose the amount is not repaid within 15 days of receipt of this notice. In that case, we will proceed with filing a civil lawsuit on the grounds of asset misappropriation and breach of verbal agreement. This is not a threat. It is a formal notice intended to protect the legal rights of my client. Sincerely, Alan Whitaker, Legal Representative, Bellevue, Washington. I read the letter one last time before signing off on its delivery. Every word was precise. No fluff. There are no wasted lines. The very next morning, while I was at work, my phone rang. It was my stepmother. She babbled, her voice slightly frantic. "Why are you making such a big deal out of this? We're family, we could have talked it through. Sending a lawyer's letter? You've embarrassed me in front of the whole extended family." I kept my voice steady, not raised, not cold. "I told you from the beginning. I'm not a kid anymore. If you don't keep your word, I'll keep my boundaries." There was silence on the other end. Just a few seconds. Then click. She hung up. After that phone call from my stepmother, no one reached out again. No follow-up from my dad. Not a word from Violet. Just silence. Thick and deliberate. As if they were waiting for me to cool off or hoping I'd go back to doing what they'd always expected from me. Quietly letting it go. I didn't respond. I said nothing. I just left. I moved out of the house I'd lived in for over 30 years. Rented a small apartment in South Bellevue near the transit center. 2 bedrooms, laminate floors, a tiny kitchen that caught the morning light. Quiet, clean, mine. For the first time in my life, I moved into a place not chosen by someone else. No permission asked. No approval is needed. I didn't tell anyone in the house I was leaving. I just packed my things in silence. Everything I owned fit neatly into 4 cardboard boxes and 2 suitcases. I left my room tidy. No note, no goodbye, except for one thing. On the nightstand, the same place my stepmother used to leave breakfast on holidays, like a symbolic gesture of care, I left a single white envelope. Inside, a printed copy of the transfer receipt, the message confirming repayment, the lawyer's letter, neatly clipped together. On the outside of the envelope, I'd handwritten one line. This was not a gift. This was a loan. And I never forgot. Then I left. I didn't lock the door. I just gently pulled it closed behind me and stepped off the porch. The Bellevue air that evening was still. No wind. But I felt cold. Not from the weather, but because, for the first time in my life, I was walking away from my own home, no longer as someone who belonged there, but as someone who didn't. On a mid-June morning, 1 week after I'd moved out, My attorney Alan Whitaker received a formal response from the other side. It wasn't from Richard Wallace. It wasn't from Clara. It came from a new attorney, someone they'd hired after receiving our demand letter. The tone of the letter was cold, meticulous, and utterly devoid of feeling. They wrote, "The $120,000 was transferred in the spirit of family support. There was no legally binding written agreement. There is no basis for classifying this as a loan or as a financial obligation requiring repayment." I read the letter from the small apartment I had just started calling home. Then I messaged Alan, "File it," because at this point what I needed wasn't just the money. It was fairness. It was a boundary. It was a clear, irreversible line that from this moment on, the word family could no longer be used as an excuse to break promises. We filed the lawsuit with the King County Civil Court on two primary grounds: misappropriation of personal assets and breach of a verbal agreement with documented confirmation. The evidence we submitted included the following: a bank receipt showing the $120,000 transfer from my account to Clara Wallace's, screenshots of messages in which she clearly stated, "I'll return it before the 15th, don't worry," and a 7-minute audio recording capturing the entire confrontation in the house, where each family member, in turn, acknowledged the money had been given, understood the terms, but collectively refused to take responsibility. The defendants, Richard Wallace and Clara, hired a young attorney who tried to steer the case toward moral ambiguity. They claimed it was a misunderstanding between family members, that legal terms can't bind family ties, and that I was being overly sensitive. But the law doesn't operate on emotion. The court looked at the evidence, and what they saw was this: a financial transaction with precise timestamps, a written and text-confirmed promise to repay, an audio recording that left no room for denial, and a family who used blood ties and familiarity as a shield for financial exploitation. The verdict came in during the third week. The court ruled that the defendants, Richard Wallace and Clara Wallace, were legally obligated to repay the full $120,000 to the plaintiff, along with $14,000 in legal fees. After the judgment was read, there was only silence in the courtroom. A long, uneasy quiet, as if everyone was waiting for something they couldn't quite name anymore. I wasn't in court that day. Alan attended on my behalf, followed the entire hearing, and sent me a short message that afternoon. We won. Full repayment ordered by the court. And after everything, I didn't feel joy, but I didn't feel sorrow either. What I felt was peace. Not because I got the money back, but because I had restored the meaning of the word family to its rightful place. A place where it can no longer be used as a shield for selfishness, dishonesty, or irresponsibility. I used to think forgiveness was how you kept people in your life, but now I understand. Sometimes, forgiveness means letting go and walking away with no expectations left to carry. And sometimes, fighting for what's fair is the quietest, most straightforward way of saying, "I'm still me, and I'm no longer anyone's shadow." 14 days after the judgment was handed down, on an otherwise ordinary morning, I received a notification from the bank. Plus $134,000 USD had just been deposited into my account. I stared at the number on my phone screen, framed by a plain blue border surrounding that cold, concise line of text. No message, no subject line, no sender name is attached. It arrived quietly, as if everything that had been shattered in the months before had never happened, as if this were nothing more than a misrouted transaction finally returned to where it was supposed to be. 2 days later, I went to the bank. I printed the account statement, signed the transfer, and moved the entire amount into a separate account, the one I had initially been set aside to buy my first home, before everything had gone off course. I sat alone in the transaction room, surrounded by white fluorescent lights and the distant tapping of keyboards. I didn't feel happy. I didn't feel sad. Just empty but not hollow, because at that exact moment, I knew I had just closed something long and was about to step into something new. That same afternoon, I signed the purchase contract for the apartment at Willow Creek, the one I'd once shown my dad, only to quietly fold the floor plan away after he frowned and said, half teaching, half dismissive, "Living at home is enough. Why move out?" This time, I didn't show anyone the floor plan. I didn't need support, didn't need approval, didn't need a nod from anyone. I went alone, signed alone, and walked out of the office holding the keys alone. But unlike last time, I didn't feel alone. I felt whole, because finally I had kept the one promise I owed to myself. I would live a life of my choosing. No permission, no favors, and no bowing my head. A week after I moved into my new apartment, no one called. No messages from Richard Wallace. Nothing from Clara. Not a word from anyone left in that old house. No apology. No quiet note. Not even anger, as if their silence wasn't due to a lack of things to say, but because they knew that anything spoke now I would only confirm one truth. They had let me go too far to reach. I wasn't surprised, but I wasn't expecting anything else either. After everything, I don't blame them, but I no longer love them the same way, not in the way a son still quietly hopes for recognition from his parents even long into adulthood. I don't know if someday they'll ever speak of me. Maybe someone in the extended family will hear the story. The son who took his parents to court, or the cold-hearted brother who forgot his roots. Maybe they'll tell it. Maybe they'll avoid it. Or maybe they'll stay silent, just like they always did whenever conflict got uncomfortable. Quiet enough for things to disappear. But if they do tell it, I won't correct them. And before I close this chapter, I want to turn and ask you, the ones who've listened all the way to the end, if you were me, would you take your own family to court to protect the last line you had left? Would you stay silent to keep the peace, or speak up, knowing it might cost you the relationship? And is there ever a time when fairness matters more than forgiveness? Leave your thoughts in the comments. I genuinely want to hear them, whether you agree or not. And if the story resonated with you, please hit like, share, and subscribe to the channel, so you won't miss what comes next. Because together we'll keep looking back at those quiet corners of life that might seem small, but sometimes they hold a whole lifetime inside. Thank you for staying until the end. At the Christmas party, my mom gave presents to all the grandkids except my daughter. When I raised my voice and questioned her, she responded, "Oh, we forgot her." After she said that, I stood up and pushed back to defend my daughter. Stick around to hear how I stood up for my daughter in this family drama. Hello, everyone. My name is Troy. I'm 35 years old. I live with my wife and our 10-year-old daughter in a miniature Mountain View, California house. Our home isn't huge, but always warm and filled with laughter. More importantly, it results from years of saving and nonstop hard work by my wife and I. As for work, I'm currently the co-owner of a tech company called Linkston Systems based in San Jose. We specialize in providing internal security solutions for small and medium-sized businesses. I founded Linkston and two of my close friends 5 years ago. Since then, after a lot of effort, we've built a team of over 30 employees, and our annual profit has reached 7 figures. My wife, her name is Nova. She owns 2 flower shops in Fremont, where she designs and supplies fresh flowers for events and weddings. Even though we both have good jobs, nothing would mean much without Aubrey, our daughter. To us, she's our lifeline, the reason we push ourselves every day. Looking at my family, people around me often say that I have a good job and a happy family and that my parents must be proud of me. And whenever I hear that, I usually smile and let it slide, sometimes steering the conversation elsewhere. The truth is, I haven't been in contact with my family for a long time, and a year ago, I filed a court order to keep them away from my daughter. Honestly, I never wanted it to be that way. After all, they're the ones who brought me into this world. But over a year ago, they were the ones who oppressed my daughter. And I believe that anyone who saw their child get hurt the way I did that day would have done exactly what I did. About a year and a half ago, everything started on a dinner night just a week before Christmas. It was a weekday. Nova and I had just finished dinner, and our daughter was sitting in the living room, busy gluing colorful paper pieces together to make Christmas cards for her friends. I was making 2 more cups of coffee in the kitchen when my phone rang. I hesitated for a moment because it was an unknown number, but then I picked it up anyway. As soon as I said hello, the voice on the other end froze me in place. It had been over 13 years since I last heard it, but I recognized it instantly. It was my mother's voice. When I realized it was her, I asked her directly how she got my number. She said Grayson had given it to her. Grayson is my cousin and the only family member with whom I still keep in touch. The call continued with small talk questions like, "How's work going?" Or, "How's your little girl doing?" I didn't feel the need to listen to that fake concern, so I cut her off and asked her straight out, "After 13 years without contact, why are you calling me now?" There was silence on the other end for a moment. Then she spoke. "Christmas is next week. Your father and I want to invite you, your wife, and your daughter to dinner. We're having a party at our house this year. It's been a long time since the whole family was together. I hope you won't say no." Right after she said that, something old and painful stirred in the back of my mind. A few seconds later, I asked her directly, "Come back so you all can crush me once more like you did 13 years ago?" After those words left my mouth, she let out a sigh and then said, "You can't live in the past forever. That was just a small thing. After that day, we planned to buy you something to make it up to you. But when we got home, you were already gone." The moment she said that, I started losing my temper. My voice got louder as I asked, "So now you're blaming me for it?" A few seconds later, maybe realizing how angry I was getting, she softened her tone. She said, "All right, Troy, I don't want to argue. The dinner will start at 6. I hope you'll come." Right after saying that, she hung up without waiting for my answer. After that phone call from my mother, memories from 13 years ago came rushing back like a flood. Everything was crystal clear, like someone had just thrown open a door I had locked tight for years. I remember Christmas when I was 20. I was a sophomore in college, just home from the dorms for the holidays. That year, my parents hosted a party with relatives as guests at our house. The atmosphere at first was lively, and as always, the conversation revolved around Simon, my older brother. Simon is 4 years older than me. At that time, he had already been working for 2 years. He was tall, charismatic, and easily captured all the attention in the room. Everyone talked about the projects he was working on, the promotions coming his way, and those office stories that sounded so grown up. As for me, like usual, I found a quiet corner and sat down. No one noticed. No one asked what I was studying or how my grades were that semester. Only Grayson, my cousin 4 years younger than me, stuck by my side the whole night. He was 16 back then, but always excited whenever I talked about tech, the pieces of code I was working on, or the old PC I was building from scratch. He didn't care if I spoke too much. He just sat there and listened closely. Around 7 in the evening, after everyone had finished eating, it was time for gift giving. My family never really had a tradition of giving presents during the holidays, but that year, because there were guests, my parents had prepared a few small gifts to hand out. At first, I didn't expect anything. Partly because I was grown and partly because I knew that my parents rarely gave us anything in this house during the holidays. But then, when they called Simon's name and handed him a gift box, everyone's eyes turned toward him. He opened it and inside was a dark brown leather watch, brand new, sitting in a velvet case. Everyone clapped, admiring the gift. I just sat quietly at the table's edge, but deep down, a small hope started to rise that maybe I'd get something, too. Then, one by one, the gifts were handed out. And when no more gifts were left on the table, I realized I didn't get one. Right after that, I stood up and walked over to where my parents were sitting. Then I asked them directly, "Dad, Mom, why did everyone get a gift except me?" After that unexpected question, my dad looked at me with an awkward expression, then said, "We forgot." My mom cut in right after he said that, but it wasn't an apology. It was a sentence complete of comparison. She said, "It's because you're not as outstanding as the others. If you were as good as Simon, people would remember you." When she said that, I realized Simon was the only one who mattered in that house. After her words, I heard whispers from a few relatives. Most of them agreed, siding with Simon. No one stood up for me. A little while later, maybe 30 seconds or so, I just nodded and replied quietly, "I understand." Then I turned around and quietly went up to my room. At that moment, Grayson came running after me. He held out his gift and pushed it into my hands, saying, "Take this one. I don't need it." Right then, something warm strangely stirred in me, but I couldn't accept his gift. I told him, "No, Grayson, that one's yours. Keep it." After returning to my room that night, I decided to disappear from their lives. That night, around 10:30, I turned on my desk lamp, took out my backpack, and started packing my things. I didn't bring much since I only came home for a short holiday break. Just a few sets of clothes, my laptop, a notebook for technical notes, and some cash. By about 11, I swung the backpack over my shoulder and exited the room. The house was pitch dark, lit only by the faint glow from the hallway. I crept, crossing the wooden stairs without making a sound. Before I left, I placed a small note on the dining table. On it, I wrote a single line: "If you no longer remember me as your son, then I have no reason to be your son anymore." And that night, I left the house like that. I took only what truly belonged to me, and I left behind a home I never really belonged to. While I was still lost in my memories, Nova's voice calling from the living room snapped me back to reality. I stepped out of the kitchen, not forgetting to bring the 2 cups of coffee with me. Then I told her about the phone call. After 13 years without contact, my mother had just called and invited the whole family to a Christmas dinner this year. After listening, Nova looked at me for a few seconds, then asked softly, "Are you planning to go?" Without hesitation, I answered, "No." After my reply, she took a sip of coffee and stayed silent. About a minute later, she spoke up, "I think you should reconsider. They're still your family. And more importantly, Aubrey should know who her grandparents are." Right after she said that, before I could answer, Aubrey, who was just over 8 at the time, looked up from the corner of the room where she was cutting colored paper and asked loudly, "Dad, I have grandparents too?" At that moment, her simple question made my heart skip a beat. I walked over, gently brushed her hair back and said, "Yes, you do. You have grandparents." Right away, she jumped up and shouted, "That's awesome. Dad, can I meet them? I'll make a Christmas card for them too." I didn't answer immediately but felt something tightening in my chest. I looked over at Nova. She didn't say a word, just gave a slight nod, like she was saying, "It's up to you." Then, after a few seconds, I leaned down, took my daughter's hand, and quietly said, "All right, I'll take you to meet your grandparents this Christmas." The moment she realized she would get to see them, she jumped with joy and thanked both me and Nova. And right then, seeing her so happy, I felt like I had just made the right decision. 1 week later, on Christmas Day, my family arrived at my parents' house at 5 in the afternoon, an hour earlier than my mom had told us. When we got there, the gate wasn't locked. I saw no cars parked outside, so I figured we were the first to arrive. But as we walked in and passed through the living room, I saw Simon, my older brother, already there with his wife and their 2 sons. The kids played games on their iPads, and Simon leaned back in his chair, sipping a beer and chatting with his wife. Mom stepped out of the kitchen right after that. When she saw me, she said just one short sentence, "I'm glad you came." Then she turned to Aubrey, gave her a forced smile and roared, "I'm your grandmother." She reached out and lightly patted Aubrey on the head in a way that felt like she was fulfilling some obligation. I stood beside them, watching that moment, feeling my heart sink. I couldn't help thinking that if she were a grandmother meeting her granddaughter for the first time since birth, the first instinct should have been to hug her tightly or, at the very least, kneel to see her face. After Mom went back into the kitchen, I leaned toward Nova and quietly said, "That's strange. It's like she just met the neighbor's cat." Nova gently placed her hand on my back and said in a calm, reassuring tone, "Maybe she's just busy. Don't read too much into it." While I was still trying to make sense of Mom's behavior, Simon spoke up, "So you finally showed up. I thought after leaving that note you were gone for good." His voice was the same as ever, half joking, half digging. I didn't answer. He wasn't worth my energy anymore. Not because I was holding back. A few minutes later, I saw Dad walk in from the backyard. Nova greeted him politely. He just gave a slight nod and walked right past us. Not a word to me or Aubrey. When Aubrey saw that cold look in his eyes, she pressed tightly against my side. Since it was still early, I suggested Nova and Aubrey walk around the house. We moved from the living room to the kitchen, then made our way out to the backyard, where there used to be a rope swing Dad had tied to the old maple tree. The house hadn't changed much in 13 years. Same old paint on the walls, the crooked family photo still hanging in the hallway, the worn-out sofa with a small tear on the armrest. Everything felt frozen in time, like it had been untouched by the years. I pointed to each corner, each patch of wall, and told Nova and Aubrey about the memories I had growing up here. About the time I skipped school to fix a computer in the backyard. The time I got grounded for shorting out the power strip by wiring the power supply wrong. In the mornings, I rode my bike through that gate in the cold to get to the town library. As I shared those stories, Aubrey listened intently, her eyes wide, still holding tightly to my hand. Nova stayed quiet, just nodding gently whenever I paused at a memory. While showing Aubrey the bookshelf where I used to hide comic books I wasn't allowed to read as a kid, I heard Grayson's voice calling out to me. A moment later, I saw Grayson and his family arriving. When their daughter Lily spotted Aubrey, she squealed joyfully and hugged her. The 2 girls were already so familiar with each other that no introduction was needed. After that, Nova smiled softly and stepped aside to let the kids run into the backyard. Seeing that, Grayson said, "Good thing it's not raining today. The kids have space to run around." After he spoke, I didn't say much. I just nodded in agreement. Nova then turned to chat with Grayson's wife. The two women acted like old friends, with no awkwardness or need for formality, since they had known each other for a long time through weekend coffee meetups and small picnics at the park near our homes. 2 minutes later, Grayson looked around and quietly asked, "Has Thomas arrived yet?" Thomas is another cousin of mine. When we were kids, he always hung around Simon, while I was just the computer nerd in his eyes. That day, he arrived with his wife and 2 sons, walking in like hosting the whole party. He gave me a single glance, then turned to whisper something to his wife. I couldn't hear what he said, but it was enough for Nova to squeeze my hand a little as we walked past them. In response to Grayson's question, I said, "He's here, probably off kissing up to Simon, trying to land one of his shady little projects." Grayson smiled at that, a knowing kind of smile. Not long after, more guests started to trickle in. Uncle Dean, my dad's younger brother, was the next to show up. He still had that thin frame and held a box of cookies like every year. He looked at me a second longer than necessary before giving a slight nod. Aunt Harper came in behind him, still going on about traffic, holding a bouquet of fake flowers wrapped in a hurry. By 6 o'clock, the dinner officially began. Even though Mom had said she was inviting the extended family this year, there were only about 20 people, including 6 kids. That matched what Grayson had told me beforehand and lined up with what I had prepared for. Around 6:15, the dinner officially began. My mother stood up to say a few words. She said, "After all these years, today is the happiest I've felt because our whole family is finally together." I looked at her as she said that, and strangely enough, I believed her words were genuine. The dinner started in a pleasant atmosphere. Everyone ate and spoke to each other with just enough politeness. It was the conversation where people kept their distance but tried to seem warm. That evening, Grayson sat next to me. Throughout the meal, he kept trying to make conversation, poured me more water, and suggested I try different dishes to ensure I didn't feel out of place in a room that had always made me feel like a stranger. And I quietly appreciated that. We talked about work, family, a little bit of everything. Nova sat next to Grayson's wife. The two spoke about fashion, teaching daughters how to fold clothes, and the latest handmade items trending on Etsy. Aubrey and Lily sat close together, heads bent over a notebook, sharing sticker sheets. They didn't pay any attention to the adult atmosphere around them. The whole dinner felt like it had been split into 2 sides. Nova, Grayson, and his family were on one side. Simon, Thomas, my parents, and a few other relatives were on the other side. No one stirred up trouble, but no one made an effort to reach across the divide either. There were no judgmental glances, but there weren't any warm greetings beyond what was necessary. Maybe both sides knew they were keeping a distance, and perhaps both sides silently agreed that this was good enough. And for me, at least at that moment, I thought it was good enough for a family dinner. It didn't have to be warm. It didn't have to be close. It just had to be peaceful as long as no one hurt anyone ever again. Near the end of the dinner, after everyone had finished dessert and the kids started running around the room, my mother clapped her hands to gather everyone in the living room. She said, "It's time for presents." Then she laughed loudly and signaled for Simon and Thomas to help bring out the gift bags she had stored behind the Christmas tree. The kids quickly gathered in the middle of the room. Some sat cross-legged on the floor, others stood close to their parents, eyes glowing with excitement. Lily ran over to Grayson, and Aubrey tugged on my hand and whispered, "Daddy, will I get a present too?" Right after she asked, I leaned down, gently squeezed her hand and said, "Of course you will." Then my mother started calling names and handing out gifts. One bag went to Simon's older son, who got a huge toy car. The second boy got a remote-controlled building set. Thomas's 2 boys received the newest Lego playsets. Lily was given a complete art kit with every color. One by one, the kids cheered as they opened their gifts, laughter filling the room. There were 5 presents in total that my mother handed out. At that moment, Nova and I knew Aubrey had been left out. And right then, I knew the past from 13 years ago had just repeated itself before my eyes. I didn't have time to think. I looked straight at my mother and asked, "Where's Aubrey's gift?" She turned to me. Her face twitched slightly like she had been caught off guard. Then, quickly, she gave a forced smile and replied, "Oh, we forgot about her." She said it in front of the room as if it were no big deal. Just a throwaway line, like my daughter, was some extra detail in a party that had already been thoroughly planned. Right after that, Aubrey burst into tears. Nova immediately bent down to hold her, one arm around her back, the other wiping away tears. Aubrey didn't cry loudly, but her little body trembled in waves. That's when my father spoke up. You disappeared for 13 years, didn't help the family in any way, and now you're asking for gifts? Simon jumped in right after. Kids cry for a bit and get over it. Don't tell me just because she didn't get a gift, your daughter's going to write a note and leave like you did. After that, I was ready to punch him, but Grayson stepped in to hold me back. Then Thomas, still holding his wine glass, smirked and said, "Calm down. You got enough money to pay the fine if you hit someone." And it didn't end there. From the sofa, I heard the voices of the children talking. She's crying because her family's too poor, so nobody gave her a gift? Another one looked at Aubrey and roared, "Maybe she's not part of the family, that's why they forgot her." Those words came from Thomas's and Simon's kids, speaking to each other. Nova just held Aubrey tighter, saying nothing. As for me, I turned to them, my voice low but clear with every word. "Don't ever say that again. I won't forgive anyone who disrespects my daughter." After I said that, the kids went quiet. While I was still figuring out how to calm Aubrey down, Lily stepped forward. She held out a small item in her hands toward my daughter and said, "Here, take this. Let's play together." At that moment, I saw Grayson from 13 years ago, sharing his gift with me similarly. About 2 minutes later, Aubrey had stopped crying. She sat quietly in Nova's lap, still hiccuping a little, but her eyes were dry. The room had started to settle down. At that moment, I leaned down, looked her in the eyes, and asked softly, "What if Daddy gave you a surprise gift right now? Would that make you happy?" Immediately, she jumped up as if she hadn't cried at all. She shouted, "I knew you'd have a gift for me." After she said that, I looked at Nova. She gave me a slight nod, opened her wallet and pulled out 6 tickets I had printed the night before. I took one and handed it to Aubrey. She grabbed it and stared at the bold letters on it. Then she screamed, her eyes lighting up like Christmas lights. "Oh my gosh, Disneyland? Daddy?" I smiled and nodded. Then I looked over at Lily. She was standing nearby, still holding the small toy she hadn't let go of. I leaned down, handed her one of the tickets and said, "This one's from me, for your kindness." At that moment, Lily looked at me, confused, and whispered, "I get to go too, Uncle Troy?" I smiled, gently patted her head, and replied, "Of course you do." Then I stood up, held up the remaining 4 tickets at eye level for everyone to see, and spoke. My voice wasn't loud, but every word was clear. "I bought 6 Disneyland tickets for the 6 kids here. The trip will be in March. I've also hired 2 chaperones to supervise the children." I paused for a second, then continued. I had believed that people had changed, but after everything that just happened, I've decided to cancel the remaining 4 child tickets. Those tickets will be converted to adult passes, and I'm giving 2 of them to Grayson's family. The other 2, I'll keep. Right after my announcement, the room fell completely silent. You could hear every breath. The faces of Simon and Thomas went blank like they hadn't fully processed what had just happened. Then the kids started crying and crying like they had just lost the most essential thing in their lives. Their mothers rushed to calm them down, looking both confused and embarrassed. Simon was the first to speak, his voice rising, "This isn't fair to my kids." Immediately, I turned to him, looked him in the eyes, and replied, "Did anyone stop to think about what was fair to my daughter?" Then Thomas jumped in, "You can't do this in front of the kids. You're going to hurt them." Grayson stood up. His tone was calm but firm. "Did anyone think about how Aubrey felt? Or is it always just about your kids? I think we've been fair in this situation. Also, teach your kids some manners. Talking like that at their age isn't okay." The tension in the room was rising. But then my father said something that made everyone turn toward him. "What are you all arguing for? A failure like him, where would he get the money to buy 6 tickets? A trip like that, with extra supervision, would cost at least 15 grand. Before I could respond, Grayson cut in. "Then take out your phone, open Google, and type in Linkston Systems. Go to the Founders section to see whether Troy is a failure." The moment those words left his mouth, Simon turned to Thomas and whispered, "Linkston Systems sounds familiar. Didn't they get an award last year?" He scrambled to pull out his phone. Every mouth that had mocked or judged me less than a minute later fell silent. And I just stood there. I didn't say another word. Because of everything that needed to be told, I had already let them find out for themselves. About 10 minutes later, we left the party. No one came to see us off. Nova walked out first with Aubrey, and I followed behind, giving Grayson a slight nod before quietly closing the door. I thought everything was over then, but it wasn't. With people like them, when they don't get what they want, they'll find a way to strike back. And the first to do so was Simon. The next morning, while I was helping Aubrey with breakfast, Nova walked over, holding her phone. Her face was tense as she said, "Troy, check Reddit, go to the family drama section." I pulled it up immediately, just as she said. And right at the top was a post that had just been pushed to the front page. The poster was Simon. He wrote that I, founder of Linkston Systems, had deeply hurt his son at the Christmas party, used money to divide children, and publicly embarrassed his entire family in front of their relatives. I stared at the screen for a moment. I just sighed, unsure of what to say. Then I suddenly remembered. During the gift giving last night, I noticed Grayson's wife holding up her phone, recording. I didn't know if she had saved the footage, but I called Grayson immediately. That video was posted publicly beneath Simon's thread not even 30 minutes later. Grayson used his account, attached the clip, and wrote a short caption. "This is the full recording of the Christmas gift moment Simon mentioned. Watch and decide for yourselves." He didn't stop there. Grayson also wrote a follow-up post. It was calm, not aggressive, simply laying out precisely what had happened. From the gift giving to Aubrey's tears to the moment I stood up for my daughter in front of everyone that night. In the comments, people started showing up. Not to gossip, but to compare the two stories. The truth was so clear there was nothing left to defend. An hour later, Simon's original post disappeared. I didn't say anything else after that. I didn't speak up, because by then, I had realized something. Sometimes, good people don't need to shout to get justice. They must stand still and let the truth walk straight into the crowd. After that incident, no one bothered my family again. No more hints, no more sarcastic messages, no more attempts to drag me back into family conversations that were just reruns of the same old act. Everything went quiet, a kind of silence that felt light, peaceful, just enough for me to know. This time they got the message, and maybe they knew they had no more chances left. Then, last March, we had a real Disneyland trip. Aubrey practically counted down the days. She started packing 3 days early and picked out a notebook to write down her must-do list, which included lines like, "Take a picture with Minnie, hug Stitch, and eat triple scoop ice cream while riding the roller coaster." Grayson's family came with us. Watching Lily and Aubrey stick together the whole time, Nova turned to Grayson's wife and joked, "These two are closer than you and I ever were." I didn't deny that. During the whole trip, the girls were inseparable. Whenever I saw Aubrey laughing in her princess dress, something inside me felt lighter. I wasn't trying to make that trip into something grand. I just wanted it to be a good memory, a real one. No tears, no feeling left out. No one is forgotten. And for the first time in a long time, I saw my daughter living exactly as a child should. Not playing the role of an adult in a tiny household. Not bracing herself against the cold stares of those who claimed to be family. Just a kid, at an amusement park, with people who genuinely love her. That's all. But for me, that was enough. And then, about 3 months ago, I heard that Simon had lost his job. The company conducted an internal investigation and discovered that he had been embezzling funds for nearly a year. Everything unraveled when an irregular transfer caught the auditor's attention. No one stood up for him. No one stepped in. 2 weeks later, my parents' house was listed for urgent sale at nearly 30% below market value. They needed the money to repay bank loans, most of which had been taken out under their name by Simon for shady investments 2 years prior. Simon's wife quickly filed for divorce and took both of their kids with her, leaving behind a stamped legal document and a few bags she had packed the night before. I didn't look into it any further. But one Saturday afternoon, just as I pulled into the garage, Nova told me someone had rung the gate bell. When I went to check, it was my parents. I had no idea how they found my house, but I didn't ask. They stood there empty-handed, coats wrinkled, eyes holding nothing that resembled who they were the day I walked away from that old house 13 years ago. I didn't invite them in. I didn't ask questions. I stood there momentarily in silence, then walked back into my office and printed out a single sheet of paper. I returned and handed it to them. On it was the phone number of a local homeless support center that offered temporary shelter and basic legal aid for people in crisis. At that moment, I wished they had treated me better. I wished they hadn't forgotten my daughter's gift. Maybe then I would have helped them. A few days later, I got a call from an unknown number. I hesitated for a few seconds, then picked up. On the other end was Uncle Dean, my father's younger brother. He didn't beat around the bush. He went straight to the point. Troy, I know things happened between you and the family, but they've hit rock bottom now. Do you have to be this harsh? After he said that, I didn't get angry. I wasn't even surprised. I just tightened my grip on the phone and answered, my voice steady and precise with every word. You were at the Christmas dinner 13 years ago, and you were at the most recent one too, weren't you? He went silent for a few seconds, then sighed without answering. I continued, then I'm sure you heard everything. You heard how my mother forgot her granddaughter. You heard how my father spoke down to us. And you heard how Simon and Thomas stood there like nothing was wrong. I paused for a moment, then said it plainly. If you care about them that much, then take them in. Please give them a place to stay. But as for me, since the day I walked out of that house 13 years ago, you've never once reached out. I never once asked how I was doing or offered help. So you don't get to stand here and tell me what I owe them. After those words, there was silence on the other end. He didn't hang up but didn't say anything else. Finally, I closed with one last sentence, quietly and firmly. I don't hate them, Uncle, but I don't owe them. And I won't use compassion to fix someone else's mistakes. Then I ended the call. Not another word. Even though they didn't come back in the days that followed, I still felt uneasy. Not because I was still angry, but because I knew exactly what kind of people they were. Once they had already shown up at my doorstep, there was no guarantee they wouldn't come back a second time. And next time, it could be when Nova was home alone or right after Aubrey left school. I didn't want to live in fear, constantly looking over my shoulder in my home. And I didn't want my daughter to grow up avoiding people she should have had the right to call grandparents. So I reached out to a lawyer. Not to sue, but to file a restraining order against my parents and Simon. My lawyer, who had helped me before with a few business contracts, didn't ask many questions. He just nodded and said, "Got it, Troy. We'll move forward with the focus on protecting your daughter." And just a week later, all the paperwork was finalized. They were legally prohibited from coming near my home, Aubrey's school, or where Nova and I work. If they violated that order, the police would step in immediately. After everything, I came to an obvious realization. Not everyone in your family knows how to appreciate you, and not everyone deserves a second chance. I used to think that after 13 years, maybe they had changed. If I gave them one more chance, maybe things would improve. But no, they were still the same people, just waiting for the right moment to make my daughter feel the same pain I once went through. I went back because I wanted my daughter to understand what family could be completely. But they were the ones who ruined that. Not once, but twice. And I finally understood this. Some people, if they once hurt you easily, they'll do it again when they get the chance. Here's my advice. If you've walked away from a toxic environment, don't return just because you feel guilty. Don't let your child face the people who once broke you. If you must choose between keeping the peace with your extended family or protecting the peace in your home, choose the latter. Because in the end, family should never be a place where you must fight to be loved. Family is where you and your child should be able to breathe easily and smile without fear. And before I wrap up this story, I want to ask you, the ones who've stayed with me through the very last moments of this journey, was I wrong for canceling those 4 Disneyland tickets right in front of my brother's kids? I know the kids weren't at fault, but has anyone ever stopped to think about how my daughter felt when left out in front of everyone? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I genuinely want to hear what you think. If this story made you reflect on boundaries, family, or how we protect the ones we love, don't forget to subscribe, hit like, and share it with someone who might need to hear this, too. Thank you for staying until the very end.